I'm going to let you all listen to the katydids and the everything by the river today while I do the Bible study. Today I'm in 1 Samuel 27, 28, and some of, no, not 29 yet. So I'm just going to kind of recap this story because there's a lot going on here. You know how we make connections. I told you about the sword that David had gotten back, the one he had taken off the head of Goliath. Goliath was a Philistine. So King David, he was in the house of Saul, the king, and he would play the harp for him, and he did good service for him, but Saul became very jealous. So Saul pursued him. David didn't kill him. David said he would not lay his hand on the anointed. And then there's some things that happened. So Saul, he got so deranged in his hatred for David. It says that he would get 3,000 men and go and pursue David. And David, one night, God caused Saul and all his friends to fall into a deep, deep sleep. And it allowed them to go into the camp where the king was sleeping. And he got his sword and his water. When he got his sword in his water, then they woke up and realized it was gone. And then he heard a voice, and it was David. And David was calling, how is it that I have been able to come in and get your sword? Now listen, now this sword is a deal because this is the sword of the king. David already has the sword of Goliath, who is with the Philistines. So you got to listen to all these connections. As a counselor, when I read the Bible, that's what happens for me. I see all of these connections that are here, and it's exciting to me because I'm like, God is just not blind in the details, the little nuances, and we need to pay attention. So Saul is just deranged, and we see some of that right now. People are just deranged. They have hatred for no reason. They're just wanting to kill people for no reason. And so when David's having the conversation with Saul and saying, I was able to get your sword, and Saul was like, you didn't kill me, so I'm gonna let you go. And David says to him, he says, why in the world would you come out here to seek a flea? So that's a humbling language. That's where he's saying, I'm nothing. You're the king. I could have killed you several times, but I didn't because I won't touch God's anointed. Saul was more honorable. Saul was less honorable than David was, and David wasn't even the king, and he was young at this time. And so God was working behind the scenes. He was doing some things. Sometimes we have to go into the desert. We have to go into a place where we don't understand. And that's kind of what David was going on. But his place, his sanctuary was actually, believe it or not, it was with the Philistines. Can you believe this? David actually, because Saul, the Lord's anointed, had chased him and tortured him and tried to kill him so much that David said, the only place I can rest is to be with my enemies, with God's enemies. So David, he goes and he moves to the Philistines where the king, of course, knows who he is, this young boy. And so the king says, when it's time for me to go up against Israel, I want you to go with me. So here is David, a great warrior, in the hands, and God is aligning all this. You need to understand this, because King Saul was evil, and you'll see later what he's about to do. He did something that God hates. He did something that God hates, and I wanna bring a point to that. So anyway, so King Saul has been chasing David, and David says, well, I'll have to just go live in the Philistines where I'll be safe. So the king, I guess he was the king, or he was the manager of all of the people that were there, as far as like the soldiers. And he says something to David. He says, I'm going to make you the keeper of my head forever. Did you get that? Goliath's head was removed by David. This man, who is with the Philistines and over all the armies, says, I'm going to make you the keeper of my head forever. Wow. We miss things in the Bible, and I honestly can tell you, the more I read it, the more I see, the more God unveils. if we're not excited about the Bible, we miss these things. So anyway, so David, he's there. And I want you to read it for yourself. I'm trying to create hunger in you. I don't want to read every word to you. But go to 1 Samuel, read about the kings, look for depth, look for connections. So anyway, Saul, he decides he's going to go to war. And he's going to go to war where David is, of course, with the Philistines. Well, he gets there and he gets scared. Well, you know what? Saul has really been stepping out of God's will, and God's been very tolerant of him, because Saul was never told by God to go and chase David. God never stirred up with him. If he did earlier, I don't remember it, but he never stirred up with him to go and chase David and make his life torturous. Never did it. But he still did it. And then he decides, okay, I have this kingdom. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run out all the wizards, all the familiar spirit people, everyone who's like a witch or a wizard or calls up, mediums and things like that. So I'm going to be righteous. Even though I'm chasing down someone who doesn't mean me any harm, I just hate him because he's better than me and I'm jealous. And, take a note of that. If you have an enemy, it might not be because of something you've done. Because there's one part where David said, you know what, if the Lord has stirred up something with you, then let me give you an offering. Let me say I'm sorry. But if it's at the hearts of men, the sons of men, then they're just going to have to do what they have to do, because there's no control over that. And so Saul, he's so angry, and he goes and he's going to go to war. God hasn't told him to go to war, but he's going to go to war. He's put out all of the soothsayers, all of the mediums, and then he begins to talk to God. He's wanting to say, now he's chased David. He's gone against God's will. God has tarried with him. God has been patient with him. God should have killed him, but God was not ready. The timing was not right. Know that the timing is important. Okay, so even today when we're struggling, know that the timing is important. So David, he's with the Philistines. He comes up there against Saul. And Saul begins to ask God, what are you going to do? Are you going to deliver? Are you going to help? What are you going to do? Now, he hasn't talked to God at all. Listen to me. When we get our lives all jacked up, sometimes it's because we haven't talked to God. And if we go and talk to God and he says, you have sin that I'm not proud of and you need to deal with it, and you don't do it, then sometimes God will begin to be silent. When God is silent and you double down or you search other ways, then you're in big trouble. So this is so relevant for us today. Todd and I and our counselees, we see so many people, and we love these people. And sometimes somebody else's life was jacked up. I like that phrase for some reason. And sometimes they jacked up their own life, but they still have a story, and God wants to speak to them. But sometimes they've grieved the Holy Spirit so much that they can't hear any longer. And so we have to work on that. So here he is. He put out all of the mediums and saying, no, you cannot do this. You cannot do that. This is against God. But yet he's ignored God's leading when it comes to David. So he's afraid. It says he's terrified of the Philistines. And so then what happens is he instead of going to God, laying on his face, prostrate before God and say, God, please forgive me. Please forgive me. He didn't humble himself. What he did was he went and said, get me a woman who can call up a familiar spirit. So he's breaking his own rules, and he did it by trickery. So Samuel, the prophet, was dead already. And so he would have been in Abraham's bosom because Jesus hadn't come yet, and you can study on that another time. So they weren't ascended to heaven until after Christ paid the price. So they were in Abraham's bosom. And so he got this medium. He got this witch, the witch of Endor, I think it was. No, that was another one. I don't know if that was him. Anyway, so he got her to say that she was the one calling Samuel to ask him about why is God not speaking to him. Listen to that. He went to a witch to see why God is not speaking to him. Instead of saying, God, what have I done to cause you to turn your face away from me? What can I do to humble myself? You know, the Bible tells us if we humble ourselves and pray and turn from our wicked ways, then God will heal us. He will heal our land. He will hear us and heal our land. You know, right now in America, you know what we're doing? Instead of going to God and say, God, why are you quiet in this area? Why are you slow moving in this area? We're not going to God sometimes saying, God, we have sinned against you. Please forgive us. So many times I find myself reading the Bible and I am actually brokenhearted that God had to endure that. We have to have that kind of heart. I'm not perfect and I have problems too, but you know what? We have to be able to read something and empathize with how that must have affected God, that he reached so far for us and we did so little. And we ran to the first witch or the first horoscope or medium or whatever we could do, instead of going to him and say, God, help me see, help me understand, give me wisdom. That's what he tells us to do. But here's Saul. He's in trouble. He's terrified. So he goes to this woman and she calls up Samuel. And Samuel says, why have you fooled me? Because he did not know it was Saul. He came up from the witch. Now, he didn't come up physically. I don't know if it was a vision. I don't know what it was, but I don't know if God caused this so that Saul's sins could be fully known. Because here he is, he's saying, put out all this witchcraft, and here he's participating in it as the king. So that's some of the problem we have right now too, is we say, you know, it's okay for me to do it, but not for you to do it. And that gets us in trouble because it calls us hypocrites. And I'm going to speak this to mamas and daddies. You know, if you are telling your children to not drink, not smoke, not sleep around, not watch things you shouldn't be watching, if you're doing that and you're doing it yourself, then you're a hypocrite. And so what you do is you stir up anger in your child because your child doesn't trust your words. They don't trust you. And you can say all manner of things like, you know, well, I'm older or whatever. Well, does that mean they're going to be able to do it when they get older and you'll be okay with it? No, we need to really think about our actions and our words need to match up so we're not hypocrites. So here is Saul. He has called up Samuel by trickery, which he should not have done because Samuel was God's anointed and he was a prophet and he was a priest and he had died. He had gone to his rest. And here he is, and God allowed it. We do not know why God allowed it other than to pronounce judgment. Because after this message, Saul was so afraid he couldn't even eat. The witch and the people around her had to figure out how to help him eat. So here he is. She's pronouncing that Israel is going into the captivity of the Philistines because David is with the Philistines, and that's where God is, because he has left Saul because of his devilment, deceit, everything he's doing. At this moment, it doesn't seem that he is still the anointed, and his life is not long for this world. I just want to tell you, friends, if God seems silent to you, don't run to a witch. Don't run to Oprah, Dr. Phil, or anybody else to get your answers. Don't run to a book. I get this question so many times, even amongst the Christian counseling circles. What book can I give my client to help them deal with trauma? Or what book can my client read to help them deal with an affair? These books are all fine and good, and they have added benefit as long as the author is someone who is reputable. But they are a trap, because what they do is they get you into things that get you away from God's word, which should be first. I'm going to tell you a trick. If you want to know what God thinks on something, go to Google and say witchcraft in the Bible, or deceit in the Bible, or anger in the Bible. Anything you say with the Bible will pull up a list of Bible verses, and you can gain wisdom from the Bible that's showing you what you should and should not do in a season. If you are in a season like David, where you're in the wilderness, you're running from your enemies, you don't know why, then go to God. Chase God's heart. Say, God, I won't go to battle until you tell me to go to battle. If you're in a season like Saul, where you're just disobedient and you're chasing everything but God's heart because you know He's going to tell you you're wrong, if you won't humble yourself, then you're coming for a reckoning. I tell people all the time, you are either God's going to get your attention through either humility, where you humble yourself, or humiliation, where He allows the circumstances of your choices to put you in a humiliating situation. This is a warning to some of you. This is a blessing to others because you know that you chose humility, you listened. And so I just want to give you this word today. I want to thank you for listening. If you need help, we are pastoral counselors. That means we come from a biblical perspective. If that's your language, then we want to help you find truth. Now, our sessions are not a Bible study. We let you talk and let you sort through some things. But if a story pops in our mind that might be pertinent to your story, then we would like the opportunity to share it. But if you say no, that's fine too. But we just love people and love people well. If we can help you, give us a call at 615-332-4389. If you want to speak a language of healing and hope and a language of chasing God's heart, not the world's heart, and not the witches and the mediums and all those things right now that are just in our culture so pervasive, then we want to help. We are set aside for such a time as this, and we want to be of service to anyone who is seeking. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.